Hi there, knife people, hello, lady and gentlemen. This intro will be short because there's a lot to cover in this video. It's long but informative. The reason I wanted to publish this video as soon as possible is because among the 4 knives that are covered here, 2 are going to be very important to the knife community going forward. One is Spyderco MagnaCut Salt series, and the other is Benchmade Water Mini Adira. Why are they going to be important? Because supposedly they introduced the newest technology in knife making business, specifically MagnaCut steel, and both are being advertised as ultimate EDC slash water sports knives. The knife industry invested a lot of money into adopting MagnaCut, and they spending a lot of time promoting it as the ultimate water resistant steel. Here are some excerpts from the interviews at the recent Blade Show in Atlanta.
Axis lock, of course. All the internals are stainless. We did make sure that all of that stuff would hold up with water.
Aaron Thomas, he said, yeah, it's really corrosion resistant. It's up there with some of the best. We found that based on our testing and based on our standards, that it is worthy of inclusion in our salt line.
Let's see if they measure up. I started out by placing 4 knives into the salt mist chamber for 24 hours, washing them down with fresh water, letting them dry for 24 hours without applying any oil to the surfaces that corroded, and then disassembling them to show to you what happened. 24 hours later, 5:15 a.m. On a wheel of misfortune are the 4 subjects of our test. I didn't put this Ozark trail there as a joke. This is a crossbar lock stainless steel blade, outdoors geared knife, representing maximum technology for minimum of the money. Far from baseline price, but with the same opening mechanism, is this Mini Adira. As you can see, the corrosion is present on one side of the blade. This is the LC200N steel on this Salt 2 Warncliffe knife. Salt and corrosion deposits can also be seen on this blade. And this is the long-awaited by everybody MagnaCut salt. The Magnax was recently released in MagnaCut Salt series, but I am not here to check out how MagnaCut performs. I'm here to check out how the knife performs as a system, because on any knife there could be elements that are not as corrosion resistant as the blade. There's no information available to identify the steel on Ozark trails, at least I don't know of any. Let me know in the comments if you do. We can presume it's a budget steel, something like 400 series or 3CR, 5CR type steel. And while very inexpensive, these steels offer decent corrosion resistance. Where they lack is toughness and edge retention. Benchmade Water Mini Adira showed the second highest level of corrosion. Except here you can clearly see that anytime there is some kind of spot on the blade where water is allowed to accumulate, like this etched logo, the moisture will pool there and form droplets, which will proceed to corrode the metal beneath. An unexpected surprise was corrosion on the back tang of the blade where it engages the crossbar lock. So now I am not looking forward to examining the crossbar under the microscope because I suspect it will look the same. This LC200N blade fared quite well. There are a couple of spots, they're not much, and there's nothing on the other side, although again the water accumulates where the etching is and forms rust. There's also a minor amount of rust right here at the break of the handle. Nothing on the lock bar or lock spring bar. There's also some rust on the jimping and also in the thumb hole. And now let's see how MagnaCut on the MagnaCut salt fared. It fared almost basically very similar to that LC200N. Maybe even better because I see much less coverage. It's definitely less than 0.5%, and there's absolutely nothing other than the salt trail right here coming down on the opposite side. There's some in the jimping there, and clearly that's where the water sat, and the part of part of both thumb holes that was pointing downward, and a little bit on around thumb stud on the adhere also got patina now, rust. And this is a new failure mode because when I tested native 5 salt, also with MagnaCut blade, there was no rust inside the thumb hole. Something is different about all 3 of these knives, and I would like to get to the bottom of it. Here's probably the most disturbing of all the findings. There's some corrosion on the secondary bevel or edge of the knives, and that is the most risk to the knife's performance when you are out there. So if your edge is corroding, you're losing sharpness, and that's, a problem for a water knife. On this channel, the soul of the knife is not the flickability, it's the cutting edge. And so whenever we see anything endangering the cutting edge, and sorry about the finagling there with a microscope, anytime I see a detriment to a cutting edge, it kind of causes a lot of internal struggle to me. So as you could see, there's a little bit more rust on the adhere's blade, but as far as the edge or secondary bevel goes, they are on par with one another. There's about the same amount of corrosive deposits on the secondary bevel. And there's no need to dwell on salt too. There's zero corrosion on the secondary bevel on this LC200N blade. But don't jump to any conclusions, because the true story is in the rest of the knife's components. So let's take our time and disassemble and take a quick look. Recently, I purchased for $12 each these driver sets called Workpro on Amazon. They're less expensive than the $19 Hodo tool I used before. I like the knurling, and they fit my medium-sized hand a little better, actually. And it has basically the same principle of operation, magnetic bearing to rotate, just like the Hoto, internal storage with all the same bits as Hoto, but these are high polished or maybe chromium plated quality bits. I've been using them for a few disassemblies already. If you're looking for a tool like that, check out the link in the description. All right, salt tube warning is apart, and that's what it looks like on the inside. There's no a single washer. All we have is the blade, the handle, the lock bar, and the spring. Spring is on the other half of the frame, and there's nothing else. But most importantly, there is no corrosion. All right, let's check out the actual main spring here, and no corrosion here as well. Zilch, nada, nothing. There isn't any corrosion. Popping open the Manix 2 salt, and what do we see? So the thing to notice right away, how tiny the liners are. I'm talking about this figure 8 shaped part that connects a stop pin with a pivot pin. That's all you get for the liner. This is a coil spring housing. It is also a backstrap stiffener and a spacer. So bravo for multitask. And speaking of the coil spring, this was my highest risk item as far as I predicted, and I was wrong. There's absolutely no corrosion, no patina, no spotting on this part. And I am absolutely in love with that ceramic bowl idea. What a genius design. It addresses weight, addresses complexity, and it's as stiff as any knife of this style. So here's that tiny little liner, and the one thing I'm not crazy about is the fact that there is a dissimilar metal in the washer there. By the way, you can't use that term interchangeably in the case of knife washers. Their purpose there is to basically serve as a bearing. Anyway, I digress. Nothing. I don't see anything on the metal Wait a second, what do we got here? Yeah, so it looks like salt deposit accumulating between the washer and the blade there. I'm gonna pull it out of the frame and see what's the liner looks like on the other side, because I think that was the salty side, or the side most exposed. Pardon me, my little difficulties here. First time I'm disassembling a Manix 2. And by the way, nobody sends me these knives as samples. I support my channel out of my own pocket. Oh, that's interesting. See this green coloration here? That means that there was something going on with those bronze washers, because that's a copper oxide deposit. And when you have copper oxide present in solution, it will attempt to deposit itself to a different metal. And perhaps that's what we're seeing on the blade. No idea why am I switching the drivers here. The screws are all T8s, including the pivot. I don't see a lot of patina on the washer itself, but you have a combination of three metals here. I have no idea what they are. Somebody commented that most of the liners and bars and such are LC200N on the Salt series. That said, I see some rust deposits here, and I think I should look under the microscope. To me as an engineer, it would make more sense to make the lock bar, for example, out of the same metal as the blade itself. Especially if you water jet cutting from the single sheet of metal, you have a lot of leftover, there's plenty of room to actually chop a lock bar from the same metal as the blade. Anyway, I totally digress here. Let's take apart Mini Adira and take a look inside. Adira is a Hebrew name for a girl, which means strong, powerful, and noble. And one of my very intelligent and somewhat sarcastic viewers pointed out that these tests establish just how noble the Adira will be. And what he's doing is punting on the fact that some metals that are most corrosion resistant are called noble. Gold, silver, and platinum are the examples. Anyway, I totally digress. Let's skip to the part where I'm looking at the knife. By now I can disassemble an Axis lock knife with my eyes tied behind my back, admiring this trusses, very rigid structure. And now I'm going to look at this spacer in the back. There's some discussion whether or not it's made of steel, titanium, or aluminum. So we're going to put it to bed using our high school physics skills and measuring its weight and volume. All right, so let's see how much this piece weighs. 4.2 grams. I took rough dimensions of the piece, and without subtracting the volume of the holes, I'm getting about 1.6 cubic centimeter, which gives me a density of 2.6 grams per cubic centimeter, and the density of aluminum is 2.7, so this is closer to aluminum than steel or titanium. Okay, let's examine all the goings on. I see some rust accumulating around the Axis crossbar, and I'm not picking anything up around the spring itself. Right here, there's definitely corrosion on the liner, and that's the side of the liner that's right under the scale. A little bit of corrosion here in the frame cutout. So let's remove the spring. By the way, the crossbar is made out of steel on this knife, as opposed to bug outs that have titanium crossbars, which would be appropriate here. And take a close look. I'm definitely not seeing anything with the naked eye on the spring, but I still will have to examine it under the microscope. Pretty straightforward removal of the liner. Look how much bigger the liner is on this knife than it is on the Manix. Okay, what do we see here? There's a little bit of a corrosion deposit right next to the washer. It's a bronze washer, which is the least of all evils as far as galvanic corrosion goes compared to copper or brass. But still, standard bronze has about 88% of copper in it, and copper forms very nice galvanic couple with steel, with iron in the steel, creating electric path and sort of etches the oxide out of the steel. Somewhat surprisingly, the titanium thumb studs aren't faring much better. There's a little bit of a corrosion around those as well. And of course, there are the liners, which you're seeing here and probably saw in my large Ardira review video. There's corrosion on the liners. Most likely because they're made out of much less expensive steel than the blade and some other components. They should have used something like H2 work-hardened steel to keep the cost down while maintaining corrosion resistance. And I'm not just bashing Benchmade to bash Benchmade. I actually love the brand. But with over 200 of their knives in my possession, I am struggling to understand this line. I don't think it actually gives a lot more advantages than, say, Griptilian or even the basic bug out, because while S30V steel is less corrosion resistant than MagnaCut, they are clearly not taking advantage of MagnaCut here, where they put a salad bar selection of metals into the same handle, and all of it reacts together, detrimenting any advantage that MagnaCut has provided. The example of the opposite is Spyderco Native 5 Salt, where MagnaCut performs to its max. I have subjected 12 knives to the salt mist test to date, and my biggest finding is presence of copper in any form will induce galvanic corrosion. You could see it with the Manix 2 salt as well a few minutes earlier. And a close second reason for corrosion are the cheap liners. If they make them out of inferior steels, they're asking for trouble. The rest of the video consists of details that I discovered under the microscope. So stick around and watch it if you are interested. And if you're not, I'll let you part with this thought of 12 knives that I reviewed to date, 8 folders and 4 fixed blades. None of them measured up to the simple old Native 5 Salt Series and MagnaCut. This knife has 0 corrosion damage. Everything else had some. Does it mean you shouldn't buy all these other knives? No. My test is closely based on ASTM B117 with one exclusion. I am using 1% salt fog, and ASTM requires a 5% salt fog. So that would corrode the knives even faster. Those tests are designed to compare similar items to one another in order to determine which of those items would corrode the fastest under the similar circumstances. It is not a predictor of how fast the specific knife will corrode in, say, Louisiana versus California versus Alaska. That doesn't work that way. It just tells you under the same set of circumstances, these two items will perform thusly compared to one another. So please, before you make positive or negative purchasing decision, this is not a determinant test. Etched logo was the Achilles heel for the Salt 2 Warncliffe, whose blade is made out of LC200N steel in Japan. Other areas affected were the thumb hole and the jimping on top of the blade, seen here, and the lower spine of the blade nearest to the handle. On Spyderco Manix 2 Salt MagnaCut blade, the most affected area was the engagement surface between the stop bar, which is also a spring housing, and the blade. And here's the surface on the stop bar / spring housing that contacts the blade. I am putting the two surfaces together to show you what it looks like in assembly. Here they are. My theory is that when these two surfaces come in contact with one another, they're dissimilar enough to allow galvanic corrosion to occur in the presence of electrolyte. In this case, salt water. Your body sweat or spilled coffee or soda would have similar effect. In my previous video, I postulated that on Native 5 salt, the blade and the lock bar were made out of the same sheet of metal, which precluded a galvanic current forming between those two components. The presence of brass washers on the Manix and the absence of washers on the Native 5 could be another reason why they perform differently, even though their blades are made out of the same steel. The coil spring used in the MagnaCut design did not sustain any corrosion damage, showed no signs of reacting with any other component, not even in the high-risk areas, such as this coil spring termination point. And I am excited about that. The results for Benchmade water mini adhere were a lot less encouraging. This is the engagement surface between the blade's tang, look on the left, and the crossbar, which we will look at in a few seconds. Another rusty blemish has appeared at the engagement surface between the blade and the stop pin. We'll take a look at the stop pin as well. Here, perhaps it would be easier to look at it if I inserted the screw in. The corrosion occurred on the side of the knife that was most exposed to the salt mist. Time to take a look at the bronze washers on mini adhere. The darker colorations that you see in certain areas are indication that a chemical reaction was occurring. This is a brand new knife. Hasn't been used in any outdoor scenario, so all that you see here is resulting from the test. And by flipping it over to the cleaner side, we can see that the reaction was predominantly occurring at the edge of the washer. An important observation is that both washers sustained some damage, regardless of the side of the knife they were on. You can see here these horizontal lines. That's where the machining marks on the liner were contacting the washer. So clearly the two dissimilar metals were galvanically reacting. Food for thought, a Hinderer knife comes with a set of extra polymer washers, accompanied by recommendation to replace ball bearings with those washers if you work near the water. These polymer washers cannot possibly cost more than 10 cents even if you buy them in a retail market. Time to take a look at the liners. For the water series, Benchmade did not disclose the steel used on the liners, although in the past they've used 410 stainless steel, which is a budget steel allowing wide variation in carbon and chromium content, which in turn also means wide variation in corrosion resistance and toughness performance. Corrosion resistance is absolutely critical for longevity of the omega springs, as any corrosion related blemish will propagate into cracking under the work loading. So I am a little disappointed. You could see a couple of blemishes on this spring right here in this area, for example. And while there are small corrosion pits, they will propagate eventually into something more sinister. It's time to circle back to the blade area of engagement with a crossbar, and we need to take a look at the crossbar itself. And here it is. Give me a second here, line it up. Sorry about the fingers. Here it is. So that's where the crossbar, sorry about that, was contacting the blade during the experiment. As I mentioned earlier, on some models, Benchmade puts titanium crossbars, but this crossbar is clearly made out of steel as it's attracted by a magnet. Alright, let me wrap it all up. I didn't have a chance to get to Ozark Trail $6 knife, but I honestly believe it deserves some recognition because for a very budget knife that you can bring on a kayak and not be afraid to lose, it performed quite well. The edge actually is not corroded at all. So it would still cut even though it has some surface corrosion. Maybe a subject for a different video. Make a comment, please, if you would like to see some of the very super budget knives in one of my videos. But I can also detect a palpable disappointment from the Spyderco loving community, Spyderco tribe, about MagnaCut 2 salt. The reason is we are so used to level of performance of Manix 2 lightweight. Here is the SPY 27 steel version. We're so used to this excellent performance and top EDC capability of that knife that we were all eagerly anticipating the salt version of it, because, you know, that would be an ultimate, penultimate Manix 2. Unfortunately, Spyderco did not deliver quite to the same level as we're used to. Why? Because they did not consider using something other than brass washers in the scenario for the salt knife. I know they're very experienced engineers, and so am I. I deal, through my regular job, I deal with corrosion every day because I can't talk about what I do at work. Anyway, so let's just say corrosion is part of my daily life. And I was disappointed that they didn't put some kind of nylon or Teflon washers like some other knives, like Hinder, for example, offers you that option. So what I did is basically, these are 0.010 of an inch washers that I took out of my Spyderco Manix 2 Salt. And you know what it did to the knife? Absolutely nothing. There's just a slight play. The play corresponds to maybe 0.002 of the looseness there, because I was able to compress this. There's plenty of flexibility in the plastic here, and I was able to bring it all together, and the knife actually runs smoother than it was before with the washers, probably because the washers are new and they have slight burrs on the edges. But I don't see any detriment. And so those coated black liners that shape like figure 8, they are in contact with the blade. They sit just proud of the plastic framing that they're in. And the knife has almost imperceptible side-to-side play. And I have to kind of manhandle it to get it to do the play. And then there's no up and down play whatsoever. And it, I know on my channel, drop-shottedness is not even a freaking word, but I can't help but notice. So this knife is a puzzle to me. It's a locking knife with one hand possible. Now see, I can't shake it loose. It's much tighter, always two-hand closing. Here's my native 5. That one works. I don't want to talk much about Adira or Mini Adira. I am entirely disappointed in the series. I tested 3 knives out of the series, and none of them performed to the level of corrosion resistance they advertised. For the last time in this video, I'm going to say the blade doesn't make the knife corrosion resistant. It's the system. Selection of materials. Not everyone in that industry is trying to pull wool over your eyes. Listen to the words of wisdom from Spyderco founder and an amazing knife maker, Sal Glesser.
Talk about balanced steels before. That's probably one of the reasons it's so popular. It's not the best at anything. It's not the best at edge retention. It's not the best in toughness. It's not the best in corrosion resistance like H2. But it is one of the most balanced steels ever produced. And that's why we highlight them so much in our salt series. So if you're going to be around water, grab a salt knife. I mean, they definitely will perform the best.
That was a meaningful in the end there. So, before you spend your money, think of a knife as a system, and think of your budget. If you are looking for a budget knife to take onto the water with you, just buy a very cheap knife that you're not afraid to lose, because you will get basically reasonable performance out of even a $6 knife. If you want the ultimate knife that you're confident will not rust under even the worst conditions, which I can't predict based on my test, but is less likely to rust under the worst conditions, Native 5 is your knife. This is this should be on every diver's vest. Manix 2 Salt. If you don't own a Manix 2 of any kind, please go ahead and grab this. You will not be disappointed. If you already have one, I wouldn't bother, because I guarantee that if I put them side by side into the salt fog chamber, they would perform. Alright, that gives me an idea. Write me a comment if you would like to see that comparison.